Welcome to the Cloud Pod, where the forecast is always cloudy. We talk all things cloud, including AWS, Google, and Azure. This is episode number 2, recorded on December 18th, 2018. Larry says no normal person would listen to this podcast. We are your hosts, Justin,
Jonathan,
and Peter.
So I sent you guys off with some homework last week around the Now Go Build segment from Amazon's Werner Vogels. What did you guys have a chance to watch that? What do you think?
I did, and it's fresh in my head because I like to do everything at the last minute.
Well, we never said you weren't a procrastinator.
Yeah, well, I tell you, it was really well produced. It was actually really enjoyable to watch.
I watched it twice now. So I watched it during reInvent after they announced it while I was getting ready on Thursday morning. And then I watched it again last night with my wife. So I actually have some candid feedback from my wife about it too.
I'm kind of curious to see where they're going to take the whole series, but I thought it was really good. It was really good use case for blockchain.
I definitely like this mixture of real life, interesting story that we're talking about, but then we're going to tie this technology bend into it that kind of gives you this interesting perspective, which is kind of where the cooking segments kind of come into an Anthony Bourdain type show. I am curious as well where they go from here. I think Jakarta was a really great starting place. He is kind of interesting choices of outfits through the episode. There's one shirt that I think is a crime against humanity in some ways, but overall it's interesting. And then my wife couldn't get past his bracelets. He was wearing a Fitbit and then like a scarf and like a bunch of bracelets. It's interesting to have my wife there because she's not technical, and she was really into it for the first about 10 minutes. She was like, she's really into the story about rice production, Jakarta, and then she was sort of intrigued by some of the descriptions and infographics they used to describe what blockchain was. Her opinion was that the infographics, while they are helpful, they're not really very descriptive, and that anytime they went to the whiteboard or they were really explaining some of the basics, she kind of lost interest in it. But she's like, I'd watch this again with you. Episode 2 comes out, so maybe we'll recap them whenever they come out, and they haven't really announced the schedule for when they're going to come out or how often. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I have to imagine though, this is going to be watched by technology people almost exclusively. I am not a chef. I love No Reservations, but I couldn't imagine someone who wasn't in this industry watching this show on a regular basis. I like the length of the episode, nice and short and tight. I wasn't bored with too many extra details.
The most interesting thing for me is that I realized after watching that show that AWS Outposts are not built for your private data center. I mean, sure, they'll sell them to anybody, but I really feel like posts, especially with the low power ARM chips they're deploying now, are going to be for regional, many multi-regional data centers in places like Jakarta.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting take, because if you think about it, it really is an Amazon data center in a box or in a rack. And if you could rapidly drop in that setup into multiple areas, you could kind of create little mini clouds all over the country or all over the world that you maybe wouldn't do a full build out for, but if you have the right partner or the right company in that region that wants to do this, maybe that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, some great potential there.
Actually, I've got a regional co-location provider who uses the caves. I think they dig some sandstone out of the ground and they were left with all these caves, and they're selling data center space in the Midwest.
Well, they're actually putting data centers in the cave.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
They're cheaper to cool.
I guess Microsoft are building them into submarines and sinking them in the ocean. I guess building it in the cave is slightly easier.
They're above sea level, above ground. They're extremely dry, which is good.
If you can get natural cooling, you can get a really cheap power. Why not?
Yeah, totally.
There's actually a lot of really cool data centers. I toured one in Amsterdam that was in a missile silo. There's definitely some unique data centers in the world. I don't know how, which data center tier they fall into, but they are definitely unique. I think that wraps up follow-up this week. Let's jump over to talk about what's in the news. Let's start with Amazon. So, we are kind of heading into the holiday season, so things are a little bit lighter than they are the rest of the year. But they did announce an ECS container roadmap, and they put this publicly out on GitHub, and they basically are telling customers what they are working on, what they may be working on soon, and what they don't have any current plans for right now, but have at least considered. So that's kind of interesting because Amazon in particular is very, very quiet about their roadmap, unless you are one of the select few who has enterprise agreements who can have these conversations with product managers. So for them to be open to this level of transparency is kind of refreshing.
So I guess they're not accepting feature requests.
Yeah, it definitely feels a little experimental right now. They don't have a workflow. They don't have some governance around what's there. There's 56 issues as of recording today that people have written, for asking for new things. So there's definitely a pent-up demand, and it'd be interesting to see if we can start by plus oneing these or adding tags if we can get priority on something.
Yeah, and then it comes down to the how much of their real roadmap are they interested in sharing. I think it's a super cool idea because the bulk of the work we do is custom engineering features that don't exist yet. Yeah, nothing more frustrating than spending tons of time and money on engineering a fix for a missing feature and have that feature released 3 weeks after you go live with your custom stuff that you now either have to migrate off of or continue to manage on your own.
When you build those services and then Amazon releases the same service 3 weeks later, if you hadn't built the service, though, would they have released the feature?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Yeah, it's like I always bring an umbrella just to ensure it never rains.
Is there anything in the roadmap that you guys thought was interesting or surprising? I know my initial reaction at it was that there wasn't much here.
I'm happy to see that they're finally adding more CloudWatch events.
I think a lot of these features, I'm sure, are game changers for certain companies.
Speaking of AWS, stay up to date with the latest AWS news every Monday morning with the Last Week in AWS newsletter. Corey Quinn gathers the news from AWS, strips out the stuff that nobody cares about, and makes fun of what's left. Subscribe today at lastweekinaws.com. Snark delivered to your inbox. Less fog, more clouds. Moving on to Google Compute. So they announced Google Cloud Next for next year, coming out April 9th through 11th at Moscone Center in San Francisco. Have you been to Google Cloud Next? I have not.
I went a couple of years ago and last year, I believe. I think they did a good job with the venue. And, I guess this happens with newer platforms, but there's a lot of basics and a lot of marketing that goes on. On the plus side, their snacks were awesome.
Did they have coffee?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God.
I was so missing the coffee from reInvent this year. Almost pivot to Google Cloud just for the coffee.
Yeah, I think I might want to go to it this year. Especially now with the podcast and all that, and us kind of being more involved in some of this. I definitely think it's something on my radar that I'd like to go and kind of check it out. At least see the spectacle that Google can put on and see how it compares to things like Salesforce's conference and reInvent. There's definitely a lot of momentum in the Google Cloud space. So I'm sure it's a conference that's also growing. And
how much is it?
It's like $1,000, I think, for early bird, and it ratchets up to like last minute for like $2,000.
Ouch.
Yeah, I mean, it's like,
well, this doesn't help you on your procrastination, Jonathan. So if you do it now, it's only $1,000. But if you do it in the new year, you're totally screwed.
Guarantee you, I end up going and I end up paying $2,000.
Well, we already talked about your procrastination problems. So it makes perfect sense to me that is the case. They also released Security Command Center, which is an interesting security-related release. It looks very similar to a couple different features from some of the other cloud providers. Security Insights being very similar to GuardDuty. It looked like it had some ability to do vulnerability scanning, integrations with Chef and Redlock and Cavern, all there. Quite a bit of technology under the hood of this one.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, right on the heels of some of the Amazon announcements. I think that these other guys are obviously, GCP and Azure are obviously going to be playing catch up on feature set. I guess it's kind of nice for them in that, Amazon does the hard work and figures out what the customers want, and the ones that get popular make it real easy for them to develop their roadmaps. I didn't feel like I was seeing any differentiators there.
Yeah, it definitely feels a lot like a Me Too. Hey, we can do this thing. Security Center, is very similar to this. They have DLP capability like Macy has. They have scanning like Inspector. So it definitely feels like kind of a natural evolution of their tooling.
I guess it just goes to show that these are the things that are on people's minds. These are the blockers stopping people from migrating to whichever cloud.
Exactly.
So it's not surprising to see that these are all common features rolling out across all the providers.
Speaking of Google Cloud, when I think of security and the cloud, I think of Foghorn Consulting. Foghorn has been around since 2008. They have been on the forefront of cloud enablement and have been delivering powerful transformations for hundreds of clients, from startups to Fortune 500, including highly regulated industries. They were early visionaries and practitioners of using code to automate infrastructure and operations to drive up cloud efficiencies while driving down your costs. Terraform, Ansible, Jenkins, AWS, Azure, and GCP. Go to fogops.io/thecloudpod to learn more about their FogOps services and Fog source code libraries. Yeah, it's interesting because it kind of leads you into, how much innovation still needs to occur in the space. And, we talked about it a little bit last week about primitives, and, Amazon used to release just primitives, and now they're releasing solution sets. And if that's where you have to play in the space to be successful, can you shortcut Amazon or Google by just releasing solutions? And it's interesting to see how that's starting to take effect in the marketplace.
Yeah, but isn't it kind of the opposite, right? Because Amazon started with primitives, and Google and Microsoft started with the PaaS, just going right to the end game, and nobody wanted the PaaS, and everybody wanted the primitives. And now they're rebooting and creating all the primitives, and Amazon's moving up the stack.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I remember early days of Google Compute, people trying to use it and saying, oh, my query got automatically killed after 10 seconds and couldn't do this type of data insert because the object was too big and all limitations. And very interesting because it was definitely a very early day PaaS solution that you now see in other solutions, but the way they'd implemented it was just too revolutionary at the time, and the market had to kind of catch up.
Yep, it's all about timing.
Moving right along to our friends up north in Redmond with Azure. They have a couple interesting announcements. They announced a fintech startup has pivoted over to Cosmos, Cosmos being their DynamoDB type competitor. And the fintech is a ClearTrend Research. I don't exactly know what they do.
I was reading about ClearTrend earlier. They are a financial forecasting company, and they'll hook into your 401k or any other kind of investments and help you make corrections. They'll warn you of changes in the market so you can make corrections. Just last week or a couple of weeks ago at reInvent, they announced the Amazon Forecast service, which basically does the same thing.
This will be my first case study that I've seen on using that platform. So I don't hear a lot of customers clamoring and excited about it, but I guess you need one, right? You need a solid NoSQL database in your ecosystem. Curious to see some comparisons. I haven't seen any comparisons in this space at all, actually. I don't know if you have.
Most of the comparisons I've seen from a performance thing are typically like MySQL, Postgres related, comparing on-premise infrastructure to cloud infrastructure. I think I've seen a little bit of Aurora test bench stuff that I've seen published out by some Amazon people in the past, but nothing that I would consider to be revolutionary or really comparing at the detail. And SQL Bench and the tooling that they use for that is interesting, but I don't even know there's a good NoSQL comparison engine because of the way that every NoSQL vendor kind of attacks the problem. Mongo is very document orientated. Other solutions are very columnar database. Cosmos and Dynamo are very key value pair. It's a little bit harder to come up with a standard benchmarking to compare them apples to apples. And so maybe that's the reason why you haven't really seen a lot of that type of testing.
Yeah, maybe I should do it. Instead of complaining it's not out there.
Looking through the press release and kind of like the 6 reasons to choose a Cosmos that they put out here, schema design is much easier and flexible. Well, Dynamo covers you there. Database reads and writes are really fast. Great. 10 millisecond reads and writes, apparently backed with a service level agreement, which you don't always get those from Amazon right away. Indexing, cost effectiveness, programming, resizing capacity for workloads. I mean, nothing here seems like a big differentiator that would make me choose Cosmos over Dynamo or over a Google product. It does definitely feel like this is a problem that they had. They went to Azure as their platform of choice and said, hey, we have this thing, we have a need and we need help. And this is what they kind of picked at the end of the day.
Yeah, so I wonder who the competitor was in this. I mean, the competitor sounds like it was SQL Server.
Yeah, definitely.
And I was just popping onto LinkedIn, and it looks like they have 2 employees listed on LinkedIn. So I don't know how massive their scale is yet.
Here we are going to move to kind of our other category here. And this is where we're kind of fitting in anything that's kind of cloud related, and where we might talk about some Oracle things as they come up that are interesting. But the first one I want to really hit on is Confluent. So on Friday last week, they announced that they were changing their licensing terms to prevent the hyperscalers, which in this case would be Google, Azure, and Amazon, from being able to compete directly with them. And they did this by moving from the Apache 2.0 license to a Confluent Community license. And this is really around preventing services like Managed Kafka and things from being able to use several of the features that they had previously announced as open source, things like KSQL, the REST proxy, the Confluent connectors, and the schema registry. And this doesn't really touch the enterprise features, which are really the things you would pay for, like Replicator and Control Center. But it does definitely talk to a bigger trend we're seeing in the space. And so, Kafka and Confluent being, one of 3 or 4 in the last month or so who've really changed their licensing model to really protect themselves from what they see as a threat from the big players like Amazon. So it kind of raises some interesting questions. And what is the responsibility for the hyperscalers to commit to these projects? Should they be supporting open source in a bigger way? and really, kind of driving the direction for these projects. And I'm a big fan of Kafka in some ways. I'm a big fan of some of the other solutions that have been in the same boat. It definitely could prevent the issues that happen with Kubernetes, where Kubernetes now has been really sharded into millions of pieces, and there's 12 different companies that do the same basic thing, but they do it in a slightly different bend. Or the way Google Compute implements Kubernetes versus the way Amazon does, or the way Azure does, causes problems in the market and causes issues for supportability. So when you're talking about this licensing challenge, what's the role of our cloud providers, and what should they be doing?
I don't think this is going to stop the cloud providers from providing the service. They will rewrite that small layer. I mean, they're not touching Kafka, they're not touching enterprise pieces. They're really just touching the control plane, and that's probably the easiest piece to replace. So maybe it's a bit of a cry for help. They say it's not about the money. They say it's more about the principle of the responsibility of the cloud providers to contribute back to the community. And I think that's a very fair point. I don't think it's going to be a success for them in the end.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because you kind of run into the scenario where, what happens if they, take your product and then they start making it like Aurora, where they take the Postgres file layer and they basically rewrote it in a different way and completely eliminate a wall file component, and really fundamentally change a key part of this application, and then that code doesn't get back to you and you can't sell that anywhere. Now they're a competitor and a partner.
It's a bigger issue, right? I think you've got open source code and you've got a bunch of people trying to make money off of that code. And I think that's cool. I think that drives competition and innovation. But if you're always taking and not giving back to that, what usually happens is there's nothing left to take after a while. And so I think all of the providers are smart, and I think they'll, in the long run, do the right thing, which may be to contribute back to these projects, whether it be, Confluent, or, maybe maybe they look and say, hey, we're going to invest only in extending open source projects with specific licenses, and we're going to completely not spend any time enabling other projects in running on our cloud infrastructure. We'll see.
I wish Amazon actually would partner with these guys a little bit further. We're a big user of Elasticsearch, and we love Elasticsearch, but there was a lot of features missing in the Elasticsearch offering from AWS that you could get an enterprise product in. Wouldn't it be great if I could somehow license the enterprise product through the marketplace, but then still use, the rest of the Elasticsearch hosted and managed by AWS? And, there's definitely opportunities for them to do more partnership and to really start driving value and helping these open source tools, right? And then it's a question of, if Confluent's building a service that really Amazon sees as a core principle of what the service should be, do they replace that with their own code, or do they say, look, we understand the limitation, but this is, we're supporting our ecosystem and our partner network?
Well, I mean, Amazon's been pretty consistent over the years of putting their customers first, in front of partners, in front of vendors, in front of everything, in front of even their own profit. I mean, if you look at Amazon as a company and how little profit they've been able to generate, if you put aside AWS, over the years. So if their customers demand that they work closely with those non-open source software providers, or open source with a specific license, I bet that would drive behavior over there.
These companies trying to sell $1 million contracts and these large enterprise deals, protecting what they see as their proprietary versions of these solutions, right? Because you can go to Confluent SaaS offering or Confluent Cloud or something. I don't remember the exact offering they have, but they have a cloud offering that they host and manage and care and feed for you, and you don't have to do it yourself. And do they, is really what Amazon providing with like a managed Kafka the same thing as Confluent Cloud? And I don't know if that's actually the case. I mean, especially in the first version of MSK, as they're calling it, there's definitely a lot of features lacking and missing. And if you really have a robust roadmap and a really good customer base that's excited about your product and you're kind of doing the right things, it seems like even as a company like Confluent, you could stay ahead of the game.
It's tough though, right? Because Confluent also is where they're running their hosted service on. They're running it on Amazon. So they're paying retail rates for EC2 or whatever underlying native primitives they need to use to offer the service. And Amazon is obviously making a margin on that from them. And now you look at, okay, how are they going to compete, and what margins are they going to be able to make to stay ahead of Amazon? It's tough to do.
Yes, it depends where you are in the implementation. I mean, if you're using Kafka and you need pro services to help you with Kafka itself, then you go to Confluent, because the Amazon managed Kafka, the support they'll provide you for that will be around managing the cluster, but not around best use cases or implementation. So it's depending on the type of support you need, it will decide where you should go to shop for that service, I think.
So Larry, in a recent interview, stated that there's no way a normal person would move to AWS database solution. And this comes on, top of Werner's keynote at reInvent, where he talked about his worst day ever at Amazon and, how they've been moving off of over the last few years towards a new Aurora database-backed data warehouse and solutioning there. So it's interesting that in this article he said only person who's going to doing this is Jeff Bezos and no one else is doing that. And it's interesting to me because Oracle as a database has been a really great database for a long time, and even from the 90s, it was a good database and it's been evolving, but their sales process, sales methodology has just made them such an evil company in so many people's eyes that I'd actually be surprised if customers weren't moving off of Oracle. And Larry's comment in this article about maintaining 50% market share in enterprise database, I just don't know. I think he's missing that his customers are relatively unhappy unless they're using his the apps. And when they talk about their licensing and their financials in their last earnings call, they talk about their cloud SaaS offerings being a major growth area. And I think that's true. If I'm buying NetSuite or I'm buying Fusion ERP or I'm buying Oracle's ERP solution as a hosted SaaS thing, yeah, sure, because I don't have to worry about paying Oracle for the SQL database license. I only have to pay them for my per user cost, and I don't have to deal with Oracle. I don't deal with all the headaches. I don't have to deal with all that. That sounds fine. But if I'm not getting that value on top of the Oracle database, I'm not sure that there's a lot of value there.
Everything you said seemed to be unsubstantiated, though. I mean, he's claiming that people are going to give up reliability, security, and performance by switching to Amazon, and clearly that's not the case.
Yeah, I think in general, ever since Larry came out and stated that NoSQL will never work, his statements and reality have been very, very loosely correlated. I mean, he just says what he says. I remember that. And then like 3 months later, he explained how their NoSQL database will be better than anybody else's. Cloud was a fad, and then our cloud is the better cloud. So that guy just says what he needs to say, I guess, to appease his current shareholders, and that doesn't really matter.
He's a very large cloud change denier until he realizes that he has to change and do something, or else he's going to lose market share. Then he comes up with a product that sort of meets the requirements that he thinks are in the market space and says, yes, I have the best solution for this, the most secure solution for this. And, and the reality is everyone's already gone off to Mongo or gone off to Amazon or gone off to anybody else.
They've got 1,000 trial activations per month, though. It must be going well. I mean, there's no mention of real customers or paying customers, but trial activations.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, we have customers all the time wanting to move off of Oracle specifically for the license cost. What's keeping them there is not necessarily features that Oracle currently has that they couldn't live without, but the transformation costs just to get off of it. And it's just, that's what's really holding them there.
I feel that they've never moved on from the per core licensing model. I mean, it was great in a private data center 20 years ago, but now with the massive machines of virtualization, the licensing model it's prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things they do, especially like in a virtualized environment, they never really figured out how to do that properly. Where if you can vMotion a server between different nodes, that potentially might need to be licensed. And so there's a lot of things that they don't quite seem to have grasped the reality of the world changing underneath them. And it's the reason why everyone kind of got freaked out when they bought Sun. And what were they going to do to Java? What are they going to do to MySQL? And so far it's been relatively okay. I know they are doing some stuff in the JVM space now that are starting to cause some people to think differently. And Amazon announced their own version of Java that you can now use as kind of their answer to protect themselves from Oracle getting more hostile. But Larry Ellison had his day in the sun and in the 90s, and that database made a lot of money, and a lot of companies built their products on top of it. And now 20 years later, I just don't see it. I think he's more in trouble than he's willing to admit.
I think he's going to focus on boat racing.
The co-CEO Mark Hurd said ERP has always been the largest segment of the enterprise applications business. I mean, always is the past, isn't it? It's no reflection of the future.
Jonathan and I worked at a prior company, a prior life, and we were running Oracle financials there, and it was really odd because I think it was Oracle financials, and the copyright was 2009, and it was much later than that by about 5 or 6 years, and you're like, I wonder why we haven't upgraded that. And the reality is the cost of upgrading that to the newer version of Oracle financials and the newer database is very expensive. And so at the end of the day, that company continued to maintain their Oracle licenses and their Oracle stuff because it was cheaper to do that than it was to upgrade to the new version or to move off of that platform for their business. And it's a very large business. So, all right, it's time for the lightning round, where we're going to cover the quick news bites. Let's hand it over to Peter.
All right, let's start with AWS Transit Gateway, now available in 8 additional regions: Canada, London, Frankfurt, Paris, Tokyo, Singapore, Seoul, and Sydney.
If only they could talk to each other.
If only they'd made it by reInvent.
Next, EKS adds managed cluster updates to Kubernetes up to 1.11. Current version just 1.13.
Well, I mean, I guess being only 2 versions behind the main release is better than 6 versions.
Welcome to managed services. All right, AWS Storage Gateway announces increased throughput and new caching.
This is cool. This is like S3FS on steroids. Their throughput's up to like a half a gig a second now.
Works great until someone sticks something in the S3 bucket, not through the gateway. All right, new region for AWS in Sweden.
They announced it back in April, but it's taken them 8 months to assemble it with the IKEA instructions.
Awesome. I'm thinking way cheaper cooling costs, but maybe higher taxes. All right. Next, HashiCorp and Google announced increased partnership, focusing on cloud provisioning, development of a Google Cloud provider for Terraform, and enabling users to declare their GCP infrastructure as code, on cloud security and secrets management with enhanced integration between HashiCorp Vault and GCP.
Oh, welcome to 2010.
Wow, really? Terraform? Aren't we onto something new?
At least they're not building their own. Next, Azure Backup Server now supports SQL 2017.
Wait, I have to run a backup server in the cloud?
That concludes our lightning round, gentlemen.
And if you like listening to Jonathan, Peter, and I talk, then think about sponsoring us. Sponsoring us is fun. You can make us say very funny things, and you can support our cause, bringing you the latest Amazon, Azure, and Google news today, tomorrow, and in the future. We want to support our podcast with sponsorships over listener funding, and we need your help to get those sponsors in the door and helping us out. Come to our website at thecloudpod.net/sponsor to get the latest information about sponsoring our podcast. And that's the Week in Cloud. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Foghorn Consulting, Last Week in AWS.com, and the Cloud Pod. Please rate us on iTunes or leave us feedback at our website, www.thecloudpod.net. Your feedback helps us improve the show.